Thank you for tuning in to Ungentrified with Kent Johnson. Ungentrified takes an unfiltered view on pop culture, music, television and film, politics, current events, and topics central to the worldwide Black community. Ungentrified is a safe audio space for celebrating Black culture in its purest form. Thank you for joining another episode of Ungentrified. Of course, it's your boy, Kent Johnson, and I have an old friend and an incredible person with me today. But before we get into the main topic, one thing that I ask everybody that comes on the show is what's on their radar at the moment. So things that are currently hot to you, things that you got early in on that are about to be hot, and you want to put everybody on, what Netflix hole you falling into, what jam you're bopping to or two-step into at the moment, what you're reading, what's on your radar right now?
What's on my radar right now? I am really deep diving into all the dopeness that is coming out of West Africa, but specifically Ghana and Nigeria. Okay. And I know that sounds like really big, but it just so happens that we're in a moment where there's a lot of good writing about the music, the fashion, the films, the culture coming out of those two countries specifically. And so it makes it even more accessible for those of us who may not live there or be of Nigerian Ghanaian descent. And so, you know, everybody knows about Afrobeat, like the music, the genre, but also I'm paying attention to artists like Toyin Ajay Adutola, who had a great exhibit at the Whitney Museum in New York, I think last year. And my homie actually, who has a company called Ikeri Jones that make all of these incredible fashions. He's kind of known for the scarves that he does.
Yeah, because he did it in Black Panther.
Black Panther, yes. Yeah. And so he's really getting his shine. And, you know, I think, and in Ghana, paying attention to architects like David Ajay, who designed what I call the Blacksonian, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture in D.C. But also, I've spent a good amount of time in Ghana this past summer and got to meet another noted architect named Joe Addo, who was just sort of helping me understand the thoughts around contemporary design and architecture in Ghana, and just thinking about what it means to have an African-centered approach to buildings and design. Like, that was just really, really interesting to me. And I guess the overall theme of why I'm interested in this is while I was in Ghana, I was really thinking about how we don't talk about urban Africa, contemporary urban Africa. We just don't know a lot. I mean, we as a society, we as Black Americans even don't really have, and unless you've been fortunate enough to travel there, and let's admit that it's expensive and can be inconvenient to do, there just isn't lots of conversation about what these cities, Lagos, Accra, Johannesburg, Kigali, Dakar, what all these cities, these urban population centers look like, and what people are able to create. And not that they're perfect. That's not what I'm saying at all. No city is. But the vitality that is thriving in those cities. And so Africa's urban culture is really what I'm digging these days and interested in learning a lot more about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And funny enough, we have the same thing on our radar at the moment. So when this releases, I will have been back, I believe. But I'm going to South Africa, to Joburg tomorrow for a week. And I'm working on a project with Visit South Africa.
Yes.
Around that very thing, about like the urban kind of Joburg and this new kind of space amongst creatives there. So I'm excited about that project, and whenever I go over there, I start getting myself like back in the mood. So I'm listening to like a lot of house music, a lot of Afro beats, a lot of comb music. and just getting myself back into that space and excited because it's like I know I'm about to come up on a whole bunch of new music while I'm there. Like I'm steady Shazamming the whole time I'm there. But no, you're absolutely right. We I guess I can say this too because it'll be announced by the time this episode drops. So Black and Abroad, our next destination is Dakar in Senegal.
Nice.
And part of that is because of, it having just this really kind of new richness and history being created in real time that I think we haven't had an exposure to yet. So we want to take a group there and expose them. So yeah,
That's dope.
yeah, I'm excited about that.
And you mentioned South Africa. One of my favorite DJs in the entire world is from Joburg, DJ Black Coffee. And so that was sort of my introduction to house music in South Africa and how global that's become. And so, yeah, I think it's a great moment because I think the film Black Panther helped to plant that seed in people's minds, just like a generation ago coming to America with the fictionalized country of Zamunda kind of introduced a counter narrative, really, of what Africa could be to Black Americans. I think Black Panther with Wakanda has done the same sort of idea, sparked that same kind of curiosity and interest. And so, and as an extension of that, I'm thinking about closer relationships. Like what does, something like Pan-Africanism, right, which can sound dated, what does that look like and feel like in the 21st century to really kind of continue to engage Africa, not as a charity case, as the mainstream media and all of that often paints Africa, but as an equitable partner in the diaspora as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had that same conversation about like the term Pan-Africanism and what that implies today versus what it implied maybe 20 years ago. And we came to the conclusion it was a bad one that it automatically gets lumped into kind of hotepery, and that's not the case, and it shouldn't be.
No.
So how do we, bring that word back to the power?
We can rebrand it.
Yes. Yes, we need to. I think we absolutely need to. They were like, should I use that term in this thing I'm writing? And I was like, I think you should, but I don't know if it's going to give the same moment that you want out of your writing just because of how everybody else will respond to it. But yes, we do need to rebrand that term. So you guys are probably wondering who I've been talking to for the last couple of minutes, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. So go ahead and tell the people who you are.
Hi, I am Fredara Hadley. I'm so excited to be here and share this space with you, Kent. I am an ethnomusicologist, which just means that I teach about music and culture, specifically music and African American culture. I teach at Oberlin College in Ohio and Juilliard in New York City. Yeah, and I gotta say I'm a proud Rattler. Graduated from Florida A&M University for undergrad and did graduate school at Indiana University and Clark Atlanta University. Currently based in New York. I do tours, walking tours of New York City based around Black music. So if you ever are in New York and want to learn a little bit more about the history of Black music in the city, holler at me. I can do that. I'm licensed. It's not just a hustle. I can, gotta say that I got my papers. I'm legal. So yeah, I just find any way I can to write, talk, form, engage Black music and Black people. That's my bottom line.
Yes. And that is Dr. Hadley. So she knows what she's talking about when it comes down to music. And I'm glad that you explained what ethnomusicology is, because when I remember when you first got that degree, and I was like, what in the world is that? So I had to do my research. So I'm glad that you broke that down. But those skills and that history and that breadth of knowledge is why I asked her to come on, because she know it all. I don't know about it all, but she know enough about enough to be close to it all.
Thank you.
And today's topic requires this knowledge. So Dr. Hadley is here with us today to talk about music and our connection to music, and specifically being of a certain age. I'll claim my age. I'll let you leave yours be. I know not to ask a woman her age.
I'm cool. I'm proud. I'm 39, looking at 40 in May.
Hey, I just entered the realm of late 30s, so I am 37. But
Welcome.
yes, thank you. It feels good. At least now, it feels
Yeah.
good. I don't know how I feel towards the end when life starts happening again. But yeah, right now it feels good. But there's something I noticed about myself and my friends that are all in this kind of age group, and I really wanted to dig into what that was. And I had read this article a couple of years ago, and you're familiar with it as well, but it put out the theory that most people stop listening to new music at the age of 33. And uh, I was really intrigued by that. So in this article, it was written by Ajay Kalia, who was at the time the product owner for Taste Profiles at Spotify. So his work was just really tracking the listening styles of all of their account users for Spotify. And in doing so, he started off with like individual listening data from US users and combine that with this system called EchoNest, which targets artist popularity data. And he generated a metric for the average popularity of the artist that a listener streamed. And this was back in 2014. And with that, he was able to create a score for users for a specific age and demographic. And in that, Kalia said that your tastes evolve quickly from ages 14 to 25. And then they start to slow down around 25 to 33. And then at 33, you flatten out. Like that's where you at and that's where you stand. And it's not saying that you don't listen to new music or you don't enjoy new music. It's just saying that that's kind of where you taper off. And a lot of the new music that you'll discover is in the space of things that you were exposed to during that 14 to 25. So you may find like some random deep cut from an album in that space, or an album that you didn't hear from that realm, and that be new music to you because it's the first time you're hearing it, but it may not be new music to the world.
Right.
So I went back into my iTunes, and I'm like crazy anal about my music and how it's categorized. And I have smart playlists for every year, like all of the music that I downloaded or got during that year that came out that year. And I noticed that around 33, well, every year leading up to 33, like the numbers got higher. Like I may have added 1,000 songs this year or 1,200 songs. And then after 33, the numbers started going backwards. Like, oh, it's 700 songs this year, 500, 300. And I think this year I've only added like 140 songs that I like this year of music that came out this year. So I was like, okay, I'm definitely his core target here with this. But I don't know, is this something that you've experienced personally? Do you feel like your musical discovery kind of tapered off at 33?
Yes. I can answer it anecdotally, like for me personally, but also my own research and, what we know as ethnomusicologists confirms this as well. Just, I went through a phase probably in my mid 30s when I was like, oh my gosh, new music sucks. It's all terrible. And I noticed that I was consciously reverting to music I already knew, but music really that I associated with my college years or maybe even my high school years. Going back to the 90s, there was this strong pull of nostalgia for me that sent me back to the 90s, the time period in my life when I started really developing my own musical tastes, separate from my parents, both in genre and in generation. But the research also bears that out, that most of us, what you already stated from the article, that most of us kind of solidify our musical taste and what we like, what we don't like by our mid 30s. And the main reason for that is music for most of us is a social activity. It's the means by which we build our social groupings. If we think back to the music that we liked in high school and the music we liked in college, we often associate it with a group of friends, a party, a place, a club we used to hang out at. those memories are connected for us. And, you know, like if you play Busta Rhymes, Put Your Hands Where I Can See, it makes me think of Greek parties at FAMU. If you play Master P, you know, anything, it makes me think of riding around with my cousin in her Forerunner, you know, like my first couple years in college. When you play Guy, it makes me think of being the kid that was too young to hang out, but that was the music that my older cousins listened to, and I thought they were really cool, and I wanted to be like them. So it conjures up very specific social relationships. And as we age, it's not that our social ability goes away, but it shifts. By the time most of us are in our mid 30s, we may not be, you know, tearing up the club anymore, opening it up and shutting it down. We may be more preoccupied with our careers and spending more time at work. We often have started families and our attention is there with our partner and with our children. And also just the passage of time. By the time we are 33 and in our mid 30s, there's a whole other generation of folks who have come up and who are now making their own popular music of the day that fits their social circumstances, that fits their generation. Mm-hmm. And so when we're 33, you know, 18-year-olds, and when we think about it, folks like Mary J. Blige, Jodeci, Missy Elliott, when we were jamming to them, they were also really young. They were in their late teens, early 20s. Right. These weren't folks in their 30s. So these were young people making music, right? And so I always tell my students that it's the job of old people like me to hate the music of young people. Like, I'm not supposed to love Lil Yachty. Like, I'm not supposed to love that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can understand it. Or Lil Uzi Vert. Like, I can get it and develop an appreciation for it. But it's actually not really made for me. You know? And if we look back in history of popular music, of American popular music, we see this over and over again. Old folks hated jazz, right? Old folks not hated, but like, you know, didn't necessarily get Motown, right? Or soul music when it came out. We know that older folks didn't like hip hop, right? And so when these genres first came forth on the scene, there's always a little bit of distance, if not direct pushback from older people who are just like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is noise, you know, and it's sometimes fun to pull out those critiques of those genres, which are now, you know, jazz is considered to be highly respectable music and whatnot. And it's fun to pull out those critiques that people had of it and see how similar they are to people's feelings about trap music. You know, debates that, you know, is not that different. It right. really isn't that different. And so that social piece is a huge piece, and coupled with the idea that when we're younger, we're just more open to experimentation in general. Not just musically, but socially, for some people in terms of drug use or whatever, what have you. People just more open to just receiving different things and trying different things. And what happens as we get older, we become a little more risk averse. And if we think about the music consumption practices that we came of age with, where we came of age during the CD era, where music was expensive. You had to go to the record store or go to Tower or go to HMV and pay $15, $16 for a CD where you might like one or two songs on it. That was a hefty investment to make. Right. And so people wanted some assurance that they were going to get their money's worth. And so if that is still people's dominant model of, or they still have that association of investment, that can make people risk averse to trying new things. Now, what has absolutely happened is technology, right? First, iTunes with downloads made that really simple. And now we're in a streaming era with Apple Music, Spotify, which reduces that barrier to experimentation to almost nothing. And so I'd be curious to see if in the coming years we see some sort of expansion of people's willingness to listen to new music, because it's so easy to do. You don't necessarily have to be in a social environment to engage it. You certainly don't have to spend a lot of money to try it. These platforms are investing a tremendous amount in terms of helping to keep their listeners connected to new music. And so it'd be really, really interesting to see if that has any bearing on that. that willingness of people to listen to music, listen to new music later, listen to more new music later in life.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that because when you mentioned like the price of CDs, I remember like if I couldn't get to the warehouse or Circuit City and I had to go to Sam Goody and pay like $19 for a
Yep.
CD, I would be pissed that day, but I would do it. Um,
Yep.
or paying like $3.49. I remember the exact amount for a CD for a single, like a cassette single. And then I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking I was like, well, that explains why we don't get the remix anymore because they made more money for a song if you sold it as a single versus now you can get a single for 99 cents.
Yep.
Um, I talked about that how I missed the era of the remix where the remix was a completely different song.
Yes.
And now it's just, oh, we'll add somebody on to the song that we already got. We're not changing up nothing. But yeah, because everybody paying 99 cents. Music is so much cheaper than it was in the 90s. And when you think about it, like with inflation, the price of music went down dramatically.
Yeah,
So
it did.
yeah, it's really like why put all this effort into things, and that maybe makes it a little bit less dense than it used to be because like I know this only has the mileage of a couple of weeks or
Right.
or it may get on this Spotify playlist and a couple of people hear it. And I hope it becomes something. Yeah, so that's why everybody moves on from an album a few days after it's released, and we're so quick to call things classic within 15 minutes. Yeah, it explains so much. So that article also states, and you brought this up about how like that kind of growing into yourself phase of like 14 to like early 20s, that's when we're closest to like the top of the music charts. So everything that's popular
Yes.
music is what's very much in our space at the time. And like you said, they just bring up moments. When you mentioned Busta Rhymes, Put Your Hands Where My Eye Can See, I immediately envisioned me standing in front of Tower Records in a line waiting to get my CD signed by Busta Rhymes when that came out. So it's like I remember that very clearly. Yeah, and there's certain songs that when I hear it, automatically, sparks up the other senses for things. Like, oh, I remember, being at Six Flags. Or I remember us dancing to this at the barbecue
Yep.
or like stuff like that. These are things that are those warm and fuzzy kind of moments. And we don't understand why the kids are getting that to Lil Uzi and Lil
Right.
Yachty right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Because can I just say, just to emphasize the point that you're making, that popular culture is driven by young people. That has always been the case. Even when we think about things like the British invasions, right? Like, because it's all in black and white for us, it can seem like, oh, those old folks or whatever, whatever. But those were teenage girls screaming over a boy band, which is no different than like what happened with One Direction or Backstreet Boys or New Kids on the Block or New Edition, right? And so it's always about young people. Young people are the largest, and I think the article points to that as well, the largest consumer group for music. And so they drive the trends. They make the trends. That was true for our generation. It's true for millennials. It's true for Gen Z. I think we're on now. And so as I said before, I really shouldn't viscerally understand what's happening in music right now because I'm not hanging out in those spaces. Like I'm not going to those shows. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not not that we have in stores anymore because we don't have record stores, but however that functions now, I'm not standing in line for 3 hours to see somebody. Like I'm just not doing, like at the point I am in my life now, right? Those are things that I no longer do. I had a period where I stood outside the in-store in Buckhead to get a CD signed by Outkast, but like that era of my life has now passed. We tend to age out of those kinds of behavior and also I would say our music discovery doesn't end, but we start trying to find things that fit our social lives now, as well as also being nostalgic about the times where we were dancing on bars, open the club up and shutting it down. And so also see people, I've noticed this among my friends, like they like, I need some music that I can just kind of chill to when I come home from work, or, something that, is more down tempo, or if it's up tempo, it's for a specific purpose. Like, oh, I need something to go on my workout playlist. And so that's, again, where I say technology is shifting some of these ideas because of how we consume music in general, and so people are really still interested in finding music that matches those moods. And I think for folks who are over 33, that can be a mixture of things. Like if you're looking for something down tempo, it may be Sade and Anita Baker from back in the day, but it also may be Solange and Daniel Caesar from today, And speaking of them, I think part of what's happening is that younger musicians now are interested in the 90s. And so we've had this rebirth of R&B, more or less. We kind of lost R&B for a minute, but we've had this rebirth of R&B that feels familiar to people who are of my age, and it makes it more accessible to them.
Yeah, exactly. I think you mentioned Daniel Caesar. I think artists like her.
Yes.
Like these are things that all of the or people or artists that are all in a space that my age group or people that I talked to in my age group immediately responded to, because they were like, it just feels familiar. And it reminds me of when I first started teaching. This was way back when, in the mid 2000s. I remember I did a lesson on poetry, and I used the lyrics from Lauryn Hill's X Factor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a class of sixth graders, and we're reading through the lyrics and trying to decipher, what Lauren's saying. And this one girl was like, "Oh, this is my grandmother's jam. She be playing this all the time." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, this song isn't that old." And this was just like 10 years later at that. So to see those people who are adults now, because the kids I taught in sixth grade then are now full blown adults, and in the ages of like your Daniel Caesars and your hers, and to hear that those remnants of those certain moments in music popping up again, it makes sense to me now reading this article about like the age of 33, where my parents responded a lot to the music that I was listening to in like the Bad Boy era, where everything was a sample, because that it harkened back to when they were teenagers of a certain age, so they could immediately respond to that. It just made complete sense.
Yeah, because now people, it's in, connecting all of these dots. Like I said, I think it'd be really interesting to see what the state looks like in another 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because I also talk to people my age, and I don't hear it so much anymore, who say like, "Oh my gosh, music sucks. New music sucks." I'm like, that's not exactly true. But we had a moment where it was hard for people to find what they liked in the absence of record stores, in the absence of really more democratized FM radio. But with the glut of musical product that existed, it took us a minute to figure out how to match people with the music that they would probably like.
Right. Yeah. And now there's all these algorithms and things that attempt to do it for you. But even still, you feel like you don't know if you're getting enough. And I think it's just because you said it's in a different format that we're used to receiving it. We're of that group that was still, I heard new music on the radio and I downloaded it on Napster. Like we're still in that kind of transitional space.
We are. I still have friends, up until maybe a year or two ago, who still didn't really understand what Spotify was or how to use Apple Music, right? And so there was a bit of a learning curve for people as well. And to be honest, algorithms aren't perfect either. Sometimes my discovery playlist, I'm like, you off this week.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
none of this is what I want to hear. You know what I'm saying? And so there can still be a challenge there. It isn't seamless. But I do think in the long run, it will be better and the underlying question here too is, can new artists find their audience in this landscape? And my answer is yes. Now, are they being paid adequately for it is a different question altogether.
Right.
But can they find people who would like their music? I think we are seeing that is possible. And so that's a mutually beneficial relationship for both the artists and for people who would listen to something great if they knew it existed.
Right. So let's do some work. Let's apply the theory of 33 to to Black music, specifically
Sure.
90s R&B. So,
Sure.
so Dr. Hadley, in your in your wide knowledge,
And
if
you
you
could just call me Fredara. That's what my parents named me, so that's good enough for me.
All right, Fredera, I'm just trying to give you your flowers while you're here, Fredera. If you were to define 90s R&B, Fredera, how would you define it?
Oh, that's such a great question. My short answer, and it's kind of glib, is Uptown Records, right?
Mhm.
That's the short answer. But what I mean by that is 90s R&B is a redefinition of R&B for Generation X. It's where R&B, which before then, now I love 80s R&B. A lot of people try to pan it. I love it. I think it's great.
Me too. Yeah.
I listen to it all day long. So I think it's a mixture of really strong jazz influenced ballads, which were brilliant and wonderful. I think it's, and sort of 80s synth pop R&B as well. So you think about some of the things Aretha Franklin was doing, who zooming, who jump, jump, jump to it, songs like that. And so, but still, those artists, in the case of Aretha Franklin, is a little bit of a legacy artist. She had been around at this point for several decades and still killing. And Anita Baker wasn't older. She was actually pretty young,
Mm-hmm.
but she was making music in a style that was reminiscent of folks like Sarah Vaughan, Dinah Washington, Patty Austin, and folks like that, who still kind of indexed an earlier period and did it flawlessly and beautifully, right? Nobody loves Anita Baker more than I do. What you see, nobody. But what you start to see in the late 80s and early 90s is the impact of hip hop on R&B. People who have grown up on hip hop, which was born in the late 1970s, cannot, or it would feel ingenuous to make R&B music that somehow wasn't impacted by this other genre that was growing up alongside them. And so you see the effect of that. And what we get out of that is, New Jack Swing with Teddy Riley and what we called hip hop soul with Mary J. Blige, which is younger. These are people born in the 1970s, for the most part, late 1960s, early 1970s. So these are Gen X people, young people, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, making R&B that feels appropriate to their experience. And so you have a lot of, this is a dawn of hearing singers over hip hop tracks, right? That are a combination of beats made by producers and still in some cases have live musicians playing on them, and samples, which is all, the sampling and all of that borrowed largely from hip hop. So you see the shift in the production as opposed to bringing in just jazz arrangers and orchestrators and songwriters in the classical sense of the term of classical R&B, classic R&B writing. And also, so it makes the music feel younger, grittier, more contemporary, gives it an edge. It is danceable in the way that hip hop is now danceable. So the same move, and a matter of fact, those early R&B, I'm thinking about those early Uptown Records songs. A lot of them are sampling and using the break beats that were used in hip hop songs,
Mm-hmm.
right? To really firm up that relationship between R&B and hip hop. And the same moves you can do to hip hop records at the time, you can do to R&B records, right? And so R&B is really leaning and looking at hip hop as a partner and as a co-creator of its sound in the 1990s. And I think that's the biggest innovation that comes out of the music. And, you see that from the beginning and cresting with songs like the Fugees remake of Killing Me Softly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is beautifully sung over this really, really sparse percussion beat, right? But also in the 1990s, you have this revisit of soul. People would call it neo soul. But even that is impacted by hip hop. It is people's interpretation of what soul would sound like for people who have also grown up on hip hop, right? And so it really is the combination of those three genres, soul, R&B, and hip hop, with hip hop being the significant change agent that makes what happens in the 90s sound and feel so different than what was happening in the 1970s and the 1980s.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you brought it up, when you think about it, you have producers like Teddy Riley who are doing R&B songs and hip
Yep.
hop songs at the same
Yep.
time. And that was kind of the first time where we started to see producers hanging out on both sides of the club, essentially.
Exactly. And Teddy Riley, who's also, a musician, like a keyboard player, grew up in church, has that in his bag. And so, like, he's able to bring a full complement of tools to his production style. And, validation of how successful he was is his production on Michael Jackson's Dangerous album, which also comes out in the 1990s. And I think, I don't think we talk about the Dangerous record enough. That's a whole other conversation. But also, the one thing I will say about it is, for people who are sometimes like, oh, Michael Jackson was this pop artist, and does he really care about blackness and stuff like that? He's at the top. He's the biggest pop artist in the world. And when he wants to reinvent his sound and break away from Quincy Jones, he goes to a younger Black producer to be the executive producer of his album. And I think that's important.
Right. Yeah. Look, when you're ready to have that conversation about Dangerous, please call me. I think that album sounds like today. Like, there are certain songs I hear on that today, and I'm like, yo, Teddy was killing it. He knew this could change everything.
Yes.
And like, one of my favorite songs that became a favorite song later on was Who Is It? Like, that song, if you hear it on a good like stereo or with like some really great headphones, it's amazing. But like,
it is so good.
Yeah, I remember Dangerous coming out, as a kid, and then just the major impact that it had at the time. And I'm just like thinking about, like, look, we used to all run home to see a video premiere on several channels. Like, the only person doing that kind of stuff today is Beyonce. But like, that era was a crazy time. And then
it was.
I think, that it almost overshadowed like a lot of the dopeness on the album. So to come back to it as an adult and sit with it, it's like, yo, this was way ahead of like everybody at the time. So
absolutely.
So to not only be at the top of your game, but then to, just like really kill it, because at that point you could drop a yeah album and still kind of reign. But Mike was like, nah, we're gonna kill it. And then I even listened to like the Teddy remixes from that era.
Yes.
And they're just bananas. But look, I could have a whole conversation about Teddy Riley.
Right. Yeah. And he deserves it because he's a genius. He's one of our geniuses. But that Dangerous album, you think about, off the strength of Remember the Time alone, like, come on. But, one of my favorite songs from that album is Can't Let Her Get Away. Again, you talk about listening to it on really good speakers, and you really hear the impact of what someone like Teddy Riley was able to have, not just on R&B and on Black music, but on pop music in general. And let's just be honest, American pop music, no matter who's singing it, Black or white, is almost always connected to Black music.
Absolutely.
So there's that.
If I were to try to explain 90s R&B to somebody, I figured out I would lump it into 3 eras. And one of them is the Teddy Riley era. The second would be the Bad Boy era. And the third would be the Timbaland era. Because I felt like that kind of changed an idea of what the end part of the 90s was sounding like. And then you brought up the neo-soul movement, which was kind of happening around the same time as the Timbaland Bad Boy era. But yeah, I was like, those would be the places I would pull from if I had to explain to somebody what 90s R&B was. Because they all, exemplify those kind of highlight moments of that decade. But in your opinion, how does 90s R&B fit into like the overall African American identity?
I think it does the same work that Black popular music has always done. One is just incredible and it's great, and I feel like it stands the test of time, but also it indexes an important moment in generation. And so, I grew up with parents who loved Motown and Stax, right? They are of those generations, and you can identify them as such. And so you think about Black folks who grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and that is the music of that era. And I think that as we are now, over 20, almost 30 years out from like 1990, the beginning of this era, I think is doing that same work. There's been this proliferation of 90s themed parties, even in television shows like Black Lightning or Blackish or whatnot. You see how music is used to represent the parents in those shows now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it really is an important index. And the 90s were such a crazy time in general in society. You had the Rodney King beating and the subsequent verdict in the LA uprisings. You had the O.J. Simpson trial. You had the Clarence Thomas hearings, Anita Hill hearings. You had Bill Clinton elected as president. Like it was a really, there was a lot going on in the world. I mean, there always is. And so when we put that into context, like all the uncertainty of being at war in Iraq and all of that, Black people were committed to still creating things that were fun and that were about us. The fashion lines of the time, that was the explosion in Black streetwear brands. Everybody had a clothing brand. Wu-Tang Clan, there was FUBU, there was Karl Kani, Cross Colors, A Different World was popping. And so we had vehicles for all of this music to really sort of build community and build connection with Black. This was the Freaknik era, right?
Mm-hmm.
All these things were happening in the 1990s. Outkast was about to pop. And unfortunately, you also had the East Coast, West Coast battle that ended with the deaths of Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. as well. And so I think that the harder sound in some cases, the frenetic energy associated with R&B of that period, the youthfulness associated with the music really represents the tenacity and the resilience and even the joyfulness of Black youth culture in that moment. It was mostly music that was up tempo in a lot of ways, but optimistic, even as people were really honest. Like one of the things I'm always struck by is you had people singing about real things, right? Mary J. Blige is probably the poster child for that, like singing about depression and being sad and all of that. That whole My Life album, you had Jodeci singing about fatherhood, so you having my baby, like people talking about these complicated realities. They didn't shy away from that, but they still were able to package and deliver those messages in really powerful and musically sophisticated ways.
Do you think there's a science to the general makeup of like a 90s R&B song? And I know that's being very broad in that, but I think about like Malcolm Gladwell and his idea of the stickiness factor and like certain moments or genres or products having like a thing that makes people cling to it and becomes like an earworm or something like that. Does 90s R&B have a stickiness factor?
I think its stickiness would be connected to all of the touch points it was able to have in the period. And so, you mentioned Rushing Home to See videos debut on MTV BET. I think all of this was a dramatic explosion in the way we were consuming music and connecting it to lifestyle. And I think that probably accentuated those bonds. And so it may not have been as good as the music was. And, I'm biased and I think it's incredible. I think it was all of those other points of entry to the music that really helped us see like, oh, this is the lifestyle. This is how you dress. And not that previous generations didn't have that, but the amplification of that. These are the schools that you go to. These are the neighborhoods you live in, the cities that you live in. This is how you dance to it. Like all of those things really come together in the 1990s. And, Black folks, young Black people's ability to really drive that conversation and not just have to respond to it, to create their own shows, their own platforms, their own, magazines, right? That all kind of are on the same page with this messaging. I think that really helps to embed all of that music, like literally kind of stamp it on their DNA.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, it came to us in so many different formats. Like I just think of like Word Up magazine and Vibe magazine, and then you turn it on to Fresh Prince of Bel Air and Tevin Campbell's on there or Biggie's on a Martin episode. Like it was it was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of that. And
And they're
things.
wearing HBCU, African American College Alliance sweatshirts. It's all of this really cohesive messaging about Black youth culture that we're constantly receiving.
It makes me think of songs like that come out today that harken that kind of space or have like these familiar kind of moments to us. And one of the songs that comes to mind is like LMA's Boot Up. Like that was a
Mm-hmm.
song that everybody just seemed to love, and it didn't stick to a certain age. And it was when I first heard it, I was like, it's all right. But then I listened to it and I realized I was like, okay, it sounds like it could have come out in like '94, and
Yep.
people would have rocked to it then, and that's why people of our age are rocking to it now. It was a simple song, but it knew what it was doing, as far as kind of touching on those points.
Yep.
There's a song now that I've been rocking lately called "Put You On." It's by this chick, Amber Mark,
Oh, I don't
and
know that one.
yeah, Amber Mark featuring Dram. But that song is intentionally '90s, so it has like the hip hop drum pattern. Is very kind of open. It feels like New York summer, kind of very playful. But I was like, I know what the song is doing. I know its intent. It was supposed to pull that out of me, and it reminds me of like when A. Marie first dropped "Why Don't We Fall in Love," and people
Yeah.
like it felt familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And those moments happen a lot now, I think, because like I said, we're growing up with '90s babies now, so they feel like they're sampling essentially our loved music. Uh, yeah, so it's weird to see, and there's another part of that theory that says that even though our musical discovery tapers off at 33, it can bounce back temporarily,
Yes.
and it usually comes when we have kids,
Yep.
uh, because now we're forced to listen to the songs that we may not have opted to in our own choices, whether it's kids music, and then whatever our kids love when they hit that age of 14. So you'll have a temporary dip back, and then you'll go right back to your normal thing. And then it mentioned that like women stay more connected to popular music than men, even though men and women will have similar tastes in their teens, but men's mainstream music decreases much faster than it does for women. But when it does happen, that kind of dip back, and it usually happens around 42. It's kind of like a musical midlife crisis for us. um, yeah, so I think Boot Up would fit right into those kind of crisis moments for people our age where they
Yep.
start remembering the good old days. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have a running joke with my friends that like when we reach the age of Tom Joyner cruise, like we all have to figure out what our individual two steps are going to be for
It's
for our
true.
songs. Yeah, it's like
It's
I
true.
I know it's coming. I got to be prepared. I got to have my two step ready, and I.
Yeah. There's a reason why, based on the demographic of that cruise, they book certain artists, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think those kind of events do a really good job of finding younger artists in the vein of, you know what I mean? And I think the same will be true for us. Like, I think a lot of times none of us think we'll ever get old. And one of the things that teaching keeps me really honest about is, oh, no, 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 no. I am not my 20s. Like, because I teach people who are in their 20s, and they're very different. They enter the world at a different place than I do.
Right.
And I have to be really honest about that.
I think about the songs that I hated in the '90s, and now how if I hear them now, I still have uh, a slight bit of warmness because like, I remember hating this song. Um, what song? I'm trying to think of like K7's like "Come Baby Come." I hated
Yeah,
that
oh,
song.
right.
What was it? Cantaloupe? I forget who did that
Cantaloupe
song.
Island, yeah, the remix of the Herbie Hancock. Yeah, I
Yes,
forgot who did it too because I hated it too.
I like those. But if I heard it today, I would be like, "Oh."
Oh, even the hate becomes kind of nostalgic. Like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't so bad.
And the one thing that sits with me is wherever I travel in the world, the rest of the world seems to appreciate older R&B and black music more than we do here. So like
Mm-hmm.
you go to Ghana, you go to Joburg, you go to Dubai or Thailand, and you'll hear a song you haven't heard in 20 years and they jam into it like it came out yesterday.
Yep.
And it's like why don't we have that appreciation for our black music back home? Like why is it not amplified in the way that we do? And then I think about it, I was like, those places are still very much connected to radio.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for, a space that has to be filled for 24 hours a day. So there's these moments where you may hear like a song from Mary J's album that was like an album cut, not necessarily a single,
Right.
but a song that people loved that you wouldn't hear today. Here it's even when we hear, like, if we happen to listen to the radio and we hear like the old school mix, we know the pocket of songs that they're pulling from. Like
Yep.
I can tell you if somebody's doing a 90s set, I was like, all right, I'm gonna hear Jay's Don't Walk Away, I'm gonna hear BBD's Poison. Like
there's a canon. There's a canon. There's absolutely a canon.
Yeah,
it's true.
And it's like there's so much more music to that. And that was the moment I went through around 33. It was like, okay, you know what? Let me start digging around like what other people were listening to that I may not have picked up on at that time. That was dope because there's so much R&B was coming out at that time. Like everybody had a record deal, and there were so many people who were one-hit wonders who have really, really dope music. And I did that for 80s R&B too. Like I started really fleshing out my collection of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis music, and Kashif, and like all of that kind of stuff. Things that I remember my parents listening to, but there were still very much things that created my musical like space when I did become a teenager. Yeah, it's really, when you boil it down, like the moment when you start to become you, which is like between 12 and 22, that's the music that sits with you for the rest of your life. And when we hear things about people who are suffering from Alzheimer's, if they hear a song from a certain era and it can trigger or draw back certain memories, it's crazy how connected we stay to those things.
Those are our formative years in sort of setting the trajectory of our lives. It's not that we don't continue to evolve and grow and develop, but there's and I see this every day teaching college students, there's so much that happens, in those middle school, high school, college years. There's so much, and our music choices, our music taste profile absolutely reflects that. And so we rarely ever fully get away from that. We may adopt new sounds, we may get into new things, but it's hard to really ever completely divorce ourselves from that.
In turn, don't feel upset with yourself because when you went out to the club that Friday night with your young cousins, you had no idea what was playing and you felt out of place. You're supposed to.
You're supposed to. And it's okay, to ask. Partly because I'm an ethnomusicologist and partly because I want to know, when I will ask young people, like, okay, so what is it, if you think about mumble rap, for instance, I'm like, how do you tell who is good and who is not? How are you making those decisions? And like, not out of shade, like I don't, it's not something that you're generally going to hear me just sort of listening to, because it's not made for me. Right. But like asking them, people who do take it seriously, okay, what's good about this? How do I know? How do you decide, this person is good or this song is good or this one isn't? Those kinds. I accept the validity of it, even if it's not for me, but like I'm interested in how they discern.
Thank you so much for chopping it up with me and having this conversation about our connection with music, about 90s R&B, and about why we don't understand Lil Uzi Vert. Even though he does have a jam. Like, he does have jams. But most of it just flies right over the radar. I'm so glad that look, this has been a work of labor for us. We've been trying to make this happen for a couple months, and we finally
and it's
did.
been my fault, not yours.
Hey, the world has different plans, but we were supposed to have this conversation right now, and we did.
Right.
I can't believe we made it.
Right.
Tell the people where they can learn about you and about what you do. Where can they find you at on the internet?
You can holler at me. My first name is distinctive enough, so that tends to be my name on everything. That's Fredara. You can holler at me on Instagram at Fredara, Fredara, or you can holler at me on Twitter at Fredara Mariva, Fredmareva. Either of those places, I tend to post a lot on Instagram, post whatever's coming up. And I'm a little bit on a production break. I'm just sort of letting myself be inspired and plotting and planning my next moves.
Oh, I hear that. And of course, you guys can find me on Instagram and Twitter as well at Kent W. Johnson. You can find the podcast there as well at Ungentrified Pod and at the website ungentrifiedpodcast.com, where all of our episodes are hosted. Of course, you can listen to us on any podcast platform that you prefer, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, we are there. Thank you for listening as you always do. Tell a friend about the dope episode you heard today and about the other dope episodes in the arsenal. Of course, if you can subscribe, do so. If you can leave a review, do that too. If you can write some words that go along with them 5 stars for that review, these are all things that help me out immensely. Again, Fredara, thank you so much for coming through, and we'll check you guys next time. Peace.